Hi, thanks for joining me today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, my name is Laurel DiSera. I am a PhD candidate, a climate scientist at Columbia University. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great. So can you talk about your work and what you do at Columbia?
So my work kind of spans two different areas. I first do climate science research. So I look at big modes of climate variability like El Nino events or ENSO, more broadly known. And I attempt to understand how these modes of climate variability impact each other, how they work together, how they can influence global rainfall and temperature. Uh, so there's this one side of climate science that I focus on with some of the physics and some of the math and um, using climate information. But I'm also interested in understanding how people use climate information, folks like farmers or people that aren't climate scientists. So I spend some time in the field talking to different individuals, understanding if they use climate information from National Meteorological Services, for example, or if they use it from their environment and how they
Mhm.
use it and if they use it in general. So I kind of have two different areas of interest for my research that I conduct at Columbia.
Okay, great. Could you talk a bit about your PhD project and what you're working on right now?
Sure. So right now, well, I'm attempting if you pursue a PhD, you'll learn that it is very complicated and there are a lot of moving pieces. So you think you're working on one paper, two papers, and then you're ending up working on four papers at one time. So I have a lot going on right now, looking specifically at how the Madden-Julian oscillation and so El Niño Southern Oscillation impact each other, and have some maps with global rainfall patterns that is in the works for publication. But right now, I'm actually also writing up a paper on some time I spent in Colombia with some collaborators, Colombia, the country, where we went and talked to farmers and fisher people to understand how they use climate information. And I think one of the most interesting things that we learned while we were there is that many of them don't use climate information from the National Meteorological Services. They use information such as how the moon, what phase the moon is in, and that will determine when they plant their crops, and less so um, how rainfall is impacting the crops, which I find interesting. But they also look at different species of birds, for example, and where they are, what sounds they're making, where they're laying their eggs, and how that might influence um, rainfall in the coming season, for example. So I'm working on kind of two different projects at the same time, to try to get them out the door. I'm in my fifth year, so I want everything to be published soon.
Yeah, cool. The projects sound great. Could you talk about your major and what you did in your undergrad?
Sure. So I went into undergrad thinking that I had my life figured out. I thought I was going to be a chemistry major and that I knew everything. And I took a few semesters of chemistry and just it wasn't my passion. And it was really hard to leave that path because it was such a defined path. You can get a chemistry degree and then you can go on to do research or whatever you're interested in. You could do a medical degree if you're interested.
Mhm.
But I learned that that just wasn't my passion. And I just would like to say, like, even if you're good at something, that doesn't mean it's your passion. I was good at chemistry, but I would watch people do their homework assignments and they were so passionate about it, and I just wasn't. So I think like that's an important thing to take away is like even if you're good at something doesn't mean that it makes you happy. So I branched out. I started taking more Spanish classes because that was something that I enjoyed in high school. And like kind of global studies, but I also
Mhm.
wanted to retain some mathematics because I liked math. So, and music. So I went to a liberal arts graduate college, so it was a little bit of an overachiever. So I ended up graduating with a degree in music and Spanish and global studies, but the Spanish and global studies were kind of like a connected major. And then I had a math minor. So I just kind of followed the path of what interested me at the time.
Mhm.
And that's what I ended up graduating with. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what was kind of your path towards a more climate-oriented PhD?
Sure. So this had started in undergraduate. So in my final year in undergraduate, I studied abroad in Argentina for a semester, which I would highly recommend studying abroad if you have the capacity to do so. So I was there for a semester, and I was there actually during the 2015, 2016 El Nino event, which caused major flooding in the country. Now, I had no idea why it was happening or what an El Nino event was, or like I didn't even know it was an El Nino event. So I had no idea. But that really like sparked my interest in understanding how climate impacts society because people were getting trapped, roads were getting flooded, people couldn't get to where they needed to go. So that really inspired me to look into this climate society interaction.
Hmm.
Um, and I got back and I had to write like my thesis for my undergrad. And so I ended up writing a paper on how climate change or how climate was impacting and climate change to some degree was impacting South America. Now, I had no idea what the depth of research that had already been conducted in this area, but it was of interest to me. And I graduated and I worked some kind of dead end jobs for a couple years before I found the Climate and Society program at Columbia University. And I was like,
Hmm.
this is exactly what I want. This is so cool. And so I started my master's there. And after that, I worked at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society for a year before starting my PhD in climate science. So I just wanted to have some sort of more climate science foundation, which is why I did my PhD in climate science.
Cool, that's great. So, can you talk about any experiences that you had that might have helped you kind of find this PhD program, like whether that was any research experiences or mentors or professors who helped you along the way?
Sure. So connections, 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 right? I had to do an internship after my master's program, and I
Hmm.
stumbled into the office of my now advisor because he was doing an internship in Guatemala. So I was able to go and live in Guatemala for a few months. And actually, he wasn't in charge of me. Some of the folks that were working for him were in charge of me. And so I ended up working for them and started forming a relationship with my advisor, who I then worked for a year. He was my boss. And then he was looking for a PhD student. And I was like, take me, I'll do it. So I think like I had a relatively simple process. I did apply to other universities for a PhD program, and I made a huge effort to try to form connections with faculty. But I think the easiest connections that I had were through people I knew. So I
Hmm.
was able to like re contact faculty at Columbia who knew somebody at this other university, and that helped me to get like an interview or at least a conversation with somebody offering a PhD position. But I ended up staying at Columbia because I trusted my advisor and thought that he was a really good fit for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I think your experience definitely highlights the importance of having a good advisor or mentor who's willing to kind of help you and give you what you need in terms of like education and just like guidance in general. So I think that's great. Um, can you talk about some challenges that you might have faced in pursuing your PhD or just climate in general after your undergrad or after your trip to Argentina, I guess?
Yeah, so in undergrad and in high school, I did not take any, well, I took a semester of physics and I took no statistics. And I
Okay.
did not realize how much statistics and physics were involved in climate science. So I guess that was perhaps my fault. So it was kind of a learning curve to get up to speed in those areas, which was fine, and it was able to do. So I think that was a challenge, and I definitely suffered from a lot of imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
trying to feel like I was catching up to some of the other folks. The other thing that climate science really demands is knowledge of coding. That was also something that I didn't do in undergrad. I didn't know how to code in Python or MATLAB or R. And so I had to learn that in the master's program, and it's something that I'm still working on today. I mean, there are many people who code from young ages, so it's definitely a challenge. So I think like in regards of like starting my PhD and coming out of the master's and an undergraduate, those are some of the hurdles that I had to jump, really acquiring new skills, learning new things. And it's not impossible. So like clearly I did it and I was able to get into a PhD program. So like don't let it stop you if you're interested in something, but you don't have all of the background skills. If you can find an advisor or somebody willing to take you on, like you can do it. I would
Hmm.
say within the PhD, um, I deliberately chose to start a PhD during COVID, which was a choice. I was like, well, if I'm going to be in my house, I might as well take classes online anyway. So I think that was quite difficult. Trying to meet people really was the hardest part. We got out of COVID, and I didn't really have a lot of connections with faculty, for example. So have been trying to work on that. And I think, um, yeah, I think one thing about the PhD is that you really can't compare yourself to what other PhD students are doing because everyone's path is different. So I think that was a little bit of a struggle for me at the beginning, and now I'm feeling a little bit more confident in the things that I've done so far and what I'm looking to do before I finish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great how you overcame those challenges and kind of overcame that learning curve and you got to where you are now. So, yeah, thanks for doing the interview today. Just to kind of wrap up, what's some advice that you would offer to high school students who are aspiring to go into the field that you're in?
I think the biggest thing is that there are so many different ways that you can enter into climate, and you don't have to only do climate science. There are many people who work with climate scientists that get to do the science work but aren't fully climate scientists. So I guess it just depends on what angle you're interested in. But there's so many different options. So don't think you have to like learn how to code or you have to understand statistics. Like there's so many ways you can contribute. But if that is something that you want, make sure that in high school, or I guess more so in undergraduate, make sure you're taking some calculus, make sure you're taking a little bit of chemistry and some physics, just so that you're prepared for going into a PhD program, because they do require those things. And make sure you're working on your connections, finding faculty you're interested in working with, and really, um, yeah, taking time to think about what you want because you don't have to jump right in after your undergraduate. You can take a couple years to work. So, yeah, just like a little bit of prep work. But if that's what you're really interested in, yeah, I would say make sure to get your ducks in a row as much as you can early on. Statistics too. Maybe take a class or two in statistics. That would help.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's good advice. I think it is important to kind of like get yourself organized, kind of keep all the important subjects fresh in your mind, especially in undergrad, like you said. So, yeah, I think that's great advice. And thanks so much for joining me today and doing this interview. It's been really helpful.
Of course. Of course. Thank you so much.